Hey everyone, welcome back to the Leadership Project with your host Mick Spears. Our vision is to inspire all leaders to challenge the status quo. We bring you weekly topics and thought-provoking guests to get you to stop, reflect, and think about what it means to be a leader in a modern world. Our aim is to help you become the leader you wish you always had, as we learn together and lead together. Please enjoy the show. So let's wind the clock forward a bit further now. How do you end up speaking at the UN? Let's start with that.
I mean, the UN journey's been quite a while in the making. The first time I ever got involved with the UN was because of my work on Rocker. I was actually still working at TALIS at the time. I remember the United Nations has a commission on the status of women every year. The Australian government sends a delegation of obviously the Minister for Women and the Ambassador for Women and Girls, and they also send what they call civil society. So people that are meant to represent, the ideas and the thoughts of women and people on the ground. And I remember because of the work I'd done with Rocker that they had selected me to go to attend this kind of couple of weeks in New York at the United Nations. And actually, the first time they selected me, I couldn't go. My father was terminally ill, so I declined it and I said no. And I remember thinking, I'll never get this opportunity again. The credit to the Australian government, they invited me the next year. So I went. So that was my first foray. I think I was 24, I think. And I went and I actually swore, I'm going to be really honest, I swore after those 2 weeks in New York that I would never work for the UN, just because I realized it was wonderful and powerful, being there. But it was actually the stories and the work of women on the ground that to me seemed to be making more of a difference than the big kind of policy things happening and people, talking the talk but not doing. So I kind of got a bit disenfranchised, I guess, with the whole levers of power and decided, fast forward to that, though. Obviously, I continued, I obviously wrapped up Rocker and worked as an engineer for another kind of 3 or so years. And it kind of all came full circle again in 2 ways. One, the Sex Discrimination Commissioner for Australia at the time was Elizabeth Broderick, who now sits on the board of my company as well. So when I started it, invested and decided I wanted to make an impact, but in this case, I needed to work with those levers of power that I so didn't think I liked. Liz was the first person I called. And that connection of we had barely spoken since the Commission on the Status of Women, but, she obviously saw something then and she agreed to help me. And and then as it turned out, when I decided to leave the corporate world to go back to Impact, I just happened to, a friend of mine was working on a project at the UN that needed some tech and innovation support. And they said, why don't you, talk to them and see? And I did it. And I think, again, because I started to realize you can make phenomenal impact on the ground. But to make impact that scales, and coming from that Rocker story of going, I wanted to do something that I believed could have such a big scale of impact. I realized it's actually about learning to work with these levers of power and that they actually need, as maybe unhumble as it sounds, they need people like me to do that. So then I ended up kind of full circle back there. But my time at CSW, I also look on fondly because, again, so many of the leaders there were women. And obviously being in an engineering sector, I'd been surrounded by a lot of good leaders, but a lot of men. And some of the women that I worked with there, Liz included, Natasha Stottespoyer was our ambassador for women and girls. And they, again, when I talk about one of my great stories from CSW was actually from Natasha, because on the first morning, everyone sits for their morning government briefing before we all go off to our presentations and speeches. There wasn't enough seats at the table. Stand-up program. And I looked around the room and in my head, I thought, there's not enough seats for everyone. And I thought, I'm the youngest by a mile. I'm also, I'm just a civilian. And so I thought, I'll sit on the side where all the advisors and aides sit. And I went and sat there, and Natasha looked, and she whispered to someone, and her aide, went out and got a chair. And she symboled to me to sit down, and I sat down, and she leant over, and in quite a brash voice, she wasn't being coddly, and she just said to me, "Don't you ever give up your seat to people again." And then just back to business. And I'll never forget, like I say, those moments where you kind of go, and I remember too, later in the week, I had made a few comments about being too young. They'd asked me to go and speak. The Canadian High Commission had put a panel on and didn't have a speaker. So the Australian government had said, "Tim, you go speak for them." And I said to Natasha, I was terrified. But what have I got to say that matters? I'm too young. And again, she said to me, "Your age is irrelevant. You can be at your best at 15, at 50, at 70. And she basically was like, "I don't ever want to hear you talk about your age being a factor again." And again, people kind of walked away. And so again, I think that was when I also realized that you have power, you have agency, you have, age doesn't matter, gender doesn't matter. And those experiences helped me to then also obviously foster that later. And potentially end back up. I think I was disenfranchised by maybe the institution, but inspired by the people. And that's probably still true. Some of the people I'm most inspired by and admire are colleagues that I work with at the UN. Can the bureaucracy grind you? Yeah, but the people, as maybe most things in most businesses, are kind of what keeps it going.
What a wonderful share. Thank you, Kim. And another great moment there that I'm glad that happened because it shapes who you are. For the audience at home, we have a very international audience, so they may not know some of the people that you're talking about there. So I'll just pause for a moment. Natasha Stott-Despoja was a senator in Australian politics that really shook things up when she entered politics. She really went in with the vision to change the way politics worked, and she turned up at Parliament in Doc Marten boots, and she was very authentic in everything that she did. She always brought herself every single day. She went on to lead the Democrats there at one moment, and really a great inspiration to many people of my generation and Kim's generation. Someone that, was a role model for me for sure, Kim, and I'm not surprised to hear that
I believe
story.
she was Australia's youngest senator, Mick, which again now feels quite ironic that I was complaining to her about age because, of course, she was going to say to me, "Well, Kim, age is irrelevant," because I think at 25 she was Australia's, she was in the Senate, and here was I at kind of 24 going, "Oh, I'm too young." So, yeah.
She's very impressive, and I'm glad that she gave you that advice, and I'm not surprised to hear it come from her at all. Let's build off that for a little while. You have had a lot of different leaders in your time, men and women. What are some of the positive and negative lessons that you've taken? So in terms of what makes effective leadership and the opposite as well, sometimes not the less inspirational leaders, what kind of lessons have you taken along the way?
I think the biggest one, and probably the first thing to say, is obviously leadership style is a personal preference to how it's received. When I often talk to people maybe about leaders I admire and why, they sometimes don't feel the same because they look for different things in leaders. So that's maybe the first thing I'll just caveat in saying, what matters for me as both leaders who lead me and how I then want to lead. The biggest thing that to me, I realize now, be it men, women, people beneath or above me, the thing that I find resonates with me the most is empathy, without a doubt. Empathy and vulnerability. I connect better with leaders who aren't afraid to be imperfect and kind of show that, leaders who say, "I don't know, but do you know?" Or, let's figure this out, or help me figure this out. And that, I think, to me then has made me learn that and do the same, to go, as a leader, your job is always to know. You don't have to know all the answers. It's about actually having the people around you and being willing enough to say, together I don't know the answer, but together we probably can. So that, I think, to me has been, when I look at all the people that I admire, I think nearly all of them, to me, when I look at what is similar, I'm like, there is definitely an empathy, a vulnerability. And yeah, I think that's really it. And I think that also then just comes from communication, right? Leaders who are willing to communicate in regards to those things. But that to me is, and that's when I look at leaders who then I go, I want to be like that. I want to manage, openly and collaboratively and with empathy. I think that's just what's transpired when I've looked at what's helped me, and then what do I want to do?
I think that is a transition that many first-time leaders do struggle with. Lesson for everyone at home: you don't have to know the answer to every question to be a great leader, and being intellectually humble, being curious, surrounding yourself with people that have got a voice and listening to them. I think there's a lot to be said there, and take note of what Kim is also saying about empathy as well. It's really an important attribute for any leader, is to be building a lot of empathy into your life and into your thinking. Let's get back to the UN then. How does all of that work lead to CPAS? And tell us what CPAS is.
So when I was asked to join the UN, they said, we're working on this project and we need a tech person. And they said, sounds quite grand, but they said, we're working on a project to assess the impact of peacekeeping operations. And basically to assess the impact of the $8 billion that's spent every year on peacekeeping. So peacekeeping happens in 13 countries, I believe, around the world at the moment that the UN's in. And peacekeeping operations vary from, a heavy military presence to a lot more kind of community and peacekeeping style things. And I remember thinking, I know nothing about peacekeeping. I don't know, a lot about the social science of, measuring impact. But from what they saw, again, I just thought this, and I remember the time my boss at UN, again, I think she could tell quite early that what drove me, because she gives quite an empowering thing about saying, it's not about just measuring, and assessing what are we doing. It's fundamentally, how do we use that to improve peacekeeping, to help the people that we are mandated to protect. It's not about, the troops, it's about the people on the ground. And that to me was the hook of going, hang on a minute, I can work for UN headquarters, but build something that, if we get it right, will improve the situation, hopefully, of the local communities and the people that are affected by conflict, all around the world. So that was, I guess, kind of my hook. And it started off as actually quite a small role, I would say, for myself, of that they knew they needed a tech solution. They needed someone to help kind of scope it and requirements-wise. And I thought, well, my background was innovation. I can absolutely help them figure out needs-based and a bit human-centered design. What do they really need? Not what is everyone telling them and what do they want, but what do they need in terms of genuinely building something that will help make an impact on the ground in peacekeeping missions. So yeah, it started out like that, and then it just kind of snowballed into me then kind of leading and building the tech myself. I had barely actually, if I'm honest, I'd barely coded before I worked at the UN. I basically taught myself to code as we went. And yeah, we've, built a platform that I think is transforming peacekeeping operations in terms of, data doesn't give you answers, but it can help inform decisions. And that's my main goal, to build a platform that collects the data, which helps them to then understand what is really happening, not always what people think, but to combine it then with the people who do have the knowledge and the skills and the expertise, the policy experts who can make the judgment off that data about what is then going to happen and what they need to do. So it has been, and I still work on it. I think it's an incredible project at the UN, and we've rolled it out to we're at 8, nearly 9 peacekeeping missions now. I've been blessed and lucky enough to get to travel to many of those to help roll it out, which, is a cultural experience in itself. But again, for me, to see on the ground what people are genuinely doing. And like I say, the people that inspire me who are in these countries helping, these communities and that in these conflict situations has actually been a really, it's one of my, I'm dreading the day I have to leave. As a consultant, I will not be doing this work forever. And I love the team, and I do genuinely love the work that we've done.
That's wonderful, Kim. And coming back to something that we started with early on in the interview, engineering, innovation, data science. Yeah, it's all interesting stuff. But the key point here is being purpose-driven and having a vision and creating meaningful impact. And that's what really becomes rewarding. And I'm sure most of our audience know this, but to just reaffirm there is nothing more rewarding than helping others.
Yeah, and I think there is, but there's patience with it too, right, Mick? And that's what I've learned, particularly with the UN and peacekeeping. Achieving peace in a country can take decades.
Yeah.
And the changes you see can be so small. And I got so frustrated at one point, I remember, because I see the data, right? I kind of help with the data that helps them understand what's happening. And at one point I was like, it's not getting better. Like we're not having we're not helping. But actually when you pull back and you look at the longer picture and you see, that, you have to understand, and that's where my colleagues I'm inspired by, who have worked on some of these complex issues for, 6, 11 years, and their patience to believe that it is having an impact and it will is incredible. I say I'm an impatient optimist because it gets me when I'm not seeing the impact straight away. But to also, like I say, you're correct, Mick, about it's, to be driven by purpose and to see what you do makes a difference. But I think sometimes you have to be patient. That impact you're going to see might take a while. And that's where just a huge belief and trust that it will matter one day is the thing that then has to ride. And that feels risky, but it in itself is worth it, I think, as well.
Yeah, that's some great advice there as well, Kim, and something for us to all think about. All right, so that's probably a good time now to talk about Vested. How did Vested come about? And I'd love to talk more about your mission, how you came up with that.
Yeah, Vested came around before I started working at the UN, actually, and it's quite serendipitous because they kind of cross over a little, but it actually came around because I just looked myself as a problem solver. I just went, if I want to solve the world's biggest problem, how do we solve them? And I had a whiteboard in my flat, and I literally wrote, what is holding us back from solving the world's biggest problems, like money, education, things. And I just kind of dived into them and tried to break them down and understand it. And that was when I realized that I alluded to it before. There's a great framework for change. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 biggest problems the world has, with, underneath it, 162 targets of, if we fix these things, we will fix poverty. If we fix these things, we'll fix food security. And I thought, great. But what got me was they said, despite the UN spending $8 billion a year on peace and all the philanthropy and government money and charity that I talked about, they said, all that aside, including all that, we are still $5 to $7 trillion a year short of enough money to get close to solving climate change, poverty, security, refugees, all of that. And I thought, well, where the hell do you get $7 trillion? And that was when I realized the answer was business again, because the capital markets and the private sector is obviously worth 100 trillions. So that's when I realized if we can figure out, and that was my solution, to figure out, how do we get money that would usually be invested, how do we basically divert that money invested into companies that are solving these problems? And I realized the biggest barrier to holding that back was data. they don't know. No one actually knows. Someone said this, they fundamentally answer the question of, where is my money having an impact? Banks can't answer it at the moment. They can tell you whether they tick the right box on diversity, but they can't tell you how much change are they actually creating. Is that good enough? Is that not? So that's when I realized my expertise and my passion for kind of impact and data could actually help solve this problem. So that was where Vested was born. And like you say, that strapline of let's redefine millionaire to be a person who impacts millions of lives was basically that. I thought, I don't want people to invest their money. At the moment, people go, where am I going to get the best return? What if that return was human life? What if you went, well, I'm going to invest my money and yeah, I might make a bit of money, but what if I put it where it could actually have the greatest impact on society as well? And that was the whole thing of going, how can we change people's mindset? And my answer is through obviously giving them the information and the data and that inform those decisions. It might not be the only answer, but that to me was what I cottoned onto as a way that I thought I could contribute what I was good at and my knowledge to solving that. And hopefully, if we succeed in funneling that money, we will solve. That is the probably the greatest and only chance we have to solve the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So it's a big dream and a big goal. But that was kind of what has underpinned why it exists and what we're trying to do.
It's really interesting, Kim, and I don't think those things have to be mutually exclusive, by the way. So bear with me for a while and let's see how this builds, and I want to check this with you. First of all, I do think there is plenty of money in the world. It's just whether it's being used efficiently or not, right? So, and there's all kinds of stats about where wealth sits and how it's unevenly distributed, etc. But the key one I'm thinking of when I look at Vested is about whether it's being employed effectively. And you spoke before about an investor sitting there and going, I want to invest my money where I get my greatest return. And then you've said, well, what if that return was on making a difference in people's lives instead of a fiscal return? My view is it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. So if I want to make a personal return that gives me financial security for my family, etc., but I want to be confident that the company that I'm investing in is also then in turn creating a meaningful impact in the world, I think that's a win-win. So I get my personal return, but also there's a meaningful impact happening in the world. And what I want to go on to, and I think this will help us continue on the conversation, nearly every company in the world that I go and look at a prospectus for or a research, I will find wonderful things written about their ESGs, about their corporate social responsibility, about, we care about people, we care about the environment, we care about this, etc. I don't think there's a company that doesn't have those values written somewhere in their organisation. But how do you know what's real? And when I say what's real, I'm not saying like it's necessarily PR spin or anything like that. I mean real impact, not just slogans, not just rhetoric. How do you work out what's real in that impact?
Yeah, that's a huge one, Mick, and I'll break it into two parts, I think, on the ESG and then the kind of CSR part. But the one blanket thing I'll say at the start is a lot of people, and this is really resonant with the UN too, a lot of people, they think they're measuring impact, but they're actually counting outputs, is what we say. They will say, UN's a great example, they'll say, we did 3,000 patrols. So what? That doesn't tell you if it made an impact, it just told you what you did. And that's what we find often in those company reports too. They'll say, oh, we ran this many things. But how much did it help? Did it change the lives and all that stuff? So that's kind of the difference between impact to what sometimes people use. So on the ESG side, and so you've hit on two reasons why Vested exists. One, to be an independent and transparent source of data, but the second one to answer that question, like you say. So with current ESG, if I said to me, or you said, or anyone listening kind of went, I invest in good, or I want to invest in sustainable, and you talk to your, financial advisors, or you go online, you will see a lot about sustainability funds or ESG. ESG, as it traditionally stands, it looks at the outside in, we say. So it assesses what is the impacts of the environment and climate and social labor laws on a company. So it's actually risk-based. It's going how much at risk is this company to the climate? And what it also assesses is very much internally, have they got a good board with diversity? So it's assessing how a company behaves, but not what they do. And that, to me, was the big thing that was missing, particularly around impact. It's all good and well to say we're good people, but do they do good? Was the real question around impact we were trying to answer. And again, that's the part with the CSR reports. A lot of companies do great stuff on the side, but for us, it's about how do you have businesses where doing good is part of the everyday. It's part of their products and services that they deliver. So Vested was set out to basically assess the impact of a company's products and services. We don't assess all their policies internally. That's ESG. We just assume their house is in order. We don't look at the things they do philanthropically on the side, because for us, it's like, well, if you built a business that was based on human needs and impact first, you actually wouldn't have to do all that stuff on the side necessarily, because you'd already be creating a huge change. So we built Vested in that sense, to look at the impact, we say the inside out, the impacts outwards of the products and services that a company delivers in regards to those 17 SDGs. A bank, for example, can have an impact on poverty as well as inequality, and the economy and many things. But the other key thing we did with Vested, and this is its big thing, was around the data, as you mentioned. I would read the data that these companies report, and there was a couple of good examples. I think there was one that came out in one of the climate reports where everyone was reporting their emissions. And they were like, if everyone was telling the truth, we already would have solved the problem, because the numbers didn't add up to what was really happening. And same as in the UK, one of the banks kind of made a sweeping statement that, the value of pensions for women, we've absolutely slashed that and we've increased it and it's great. Yet the data from the OECD and Eurostat and the World Bank said it had gotten worse. So either they inadvertently had got it wrong, or I don't want to say that they were lying, but that was one thing for me. So Vested was built. We pull on 100 million data points from what we say is kind of external validated impact data. So it's data from the World Bank, UN, the OECD, all those kind of organizations. And it's data that's actually never been brought into the finance sector because it's impact data. But what I realized was if you bring that in, it helps answer that question, because the World Bank will tell you, is the poverty rate changing? Is the number of unbanked people in the world changing? So if we can look at a company and our algorithm figures out what it does, where it does it, really important, because some obviously regions and countries are more in need than others for certain problems. So if we can understand what it does and where it does it, then we can use that data to understand what is the change that's occurring in those countries, and thus how much of that change is responsible and caused by those organizations doing business. So we start to get a really clear picture of not just what companies are solving what problems, but how well are they solving them? Is there room for better impact? And where are they also having a negative impact? Because that matters too. It's not always about, mobile phones are a great example. They are so impactful in terms of, empowerment and access to jobs and things, but they produce a lot of waste, right? And that's okay. That's a trade-off that people can make, and the positives can outweigh the benefits, but it's about being transparent on that. And the data that underpins that says, this is how we know. There's, I think it's Eurostat has the data for how many mobile phone wastage there is in the Netherlands. So we know if you do business there, if you're contributing to that. So for us, it was about bringing in all that data, around a solid methodology on social science on how to assess the impact, and bringing that to the finance sector to say, hey, you want to stand behind what you do. And what we've generally found is people said to us when we first kind of started doing this, and they said, oh, the companies will hate you because you'll make them all look bad. But I've honestly found the opposite, Nick. Companies they inherently know if they are doing good or not. And most of them would say, yeah, that's right. We're not doing that great, but how do we do better? And that has been actually, for me personally, a motivating thing to go, I'm not actually banging my head against a brick wall. There are many leaders who want to transform their companies, but they don't know how. Because this is quite a niche. It's bringing two very distinct sectors that are far apart, the impact sector and the money-making finance capital market together. But not always, but generally the reception's been great. So yeah, that for me, that's a very long-winded summary of why we want transparent external data so we do not use self-reported company data for those reasons. And yeah, we don't look at internal metrics and policies. We look very much externally about, does their everyday products and services make our world better and better for us?
I'm picking up so many levels there, Kim. One of the first ones is the difference between measuring whether the products and services that you're delivering to the world are creating a meaningful impact versus, we're good corporate citizens because we donate to charity, for example. That's the first one that I picked up. The second one then was about transparency and having that really independent and objective view as to whether the statements are genuine and not just PR spin, et cetera, et cetera. And the third one is about the return on invested capital. And in this case, the social return on invested capital, that it is actually making an impact. It's not just about dollars spent, it's about impact created. And what I picked up, which gave me some heart actually, that it's not just the investors that are looking for that, the companies themselves, the better ones for sure, when they say we spend X million dollars each year on ESG related activities, they also want to know that that money wasn't just flushed down the toilet somewhere, that it did actually do something, yeah?
Yeah, and I think too, Mick, I used to get quite naively frustrated too, because I agree, some companies would say, yeah, wow, we want to improve that. And if I'm honest, it's often 90% of the time, it's still financially driven, because if they improve those numbers, they're more likely to get investment, right? From the growing wave of people like you and I who go, we want our money to do good. So it's often very much financially driven, but I've also learned to go, but that's okay. Because actually, as a business, they have a duty to their shareholders to generate a return. But if we can help them, like you say, Mike, win-win, do that as they make an impact, then that's okay. And I'll never forget, I walked out of a meeting one day with a very big asset manager here in the UK. They own more pensions, the majority of pension funds here in the UK. And I walked out and I was like, I'd had this meeting where they were explaining, yep, we love this and this is what we do with it. And I walked out and I said, oh my God, they just want to use it for marketing and comms. They just want to use it so that more people invest in their pensions. And I was so personally and impact-wise, angry about it. And it was one of my kind of mentors and advisors that kind of said to me, yes, Kim, they're always going to be wanting to do that. But you realize that amount of money that's going to shift into, if you've got this right, it will shift into actual companies doing good. So you have to, I don't want to say dance with the devil, because we can both benefit from these, doing this together.
Yeah, just take it.
Yeah, definitely. You're right. I think, Mick, there are genuine companies that genuinely want to care. There are ones that also do know that this is a shared value kind of thing.
Yeah, just take it as a win-win and just go, well, okay, benefit, PR benefit, but genuine impact, and just take that as a win-win. That's an interesting one. And I think it's taking things to the next level I'll give a personal example here and now just go at the individual level. It's the difference between I did my bit, I wrote a check, and actually going and checking that meaningful impact was created. And I think there's really something there. And once again, I said this earlier in the interview, I'm really proud of everything that you're doing, Kim, and seeing you flourish and everything you're creating in the world. And I think there's something in this for everyone to take away. And we certainly will give the details of Vested in the show notes for everyone to be able to follow this and see it through. So that brings us pretty much to an end, Kim. And as you know, I do ask all of my guests the same two questions at the end of the interview. So the first one, what is the one thing that you know now that you wish you knew when you were 20? And of course, for you, that's not that long ago compared to some of our guests. But what do you know now that you wish you knew when you were 20?
One is a hard thing to narrow down to, Mick, but I think it touches on what I talked about earlier about all the amazing mentors and that. I think, however, the biggest thing I've learned is no amount of people believing in me rescues me from the project of having to believe in myself. And I think very early on in my kind of leadership journey, I thought that if I just surrounded myself by all these people who believed in me and they would help. But I've also just realized, that's great, but if I don't have the courage and bravery and the self-belief to back myself, it kind of doesn't matter. So that to me has probably been only a more recent one. But yeah, one of the things that I just think, if I had a little more self-belief and self-confidence when I was younger, I think it would have made a difference. And I'm forever grateful to the people I did surround myself in, because I think they saw that. They knew that if they could build that up, I'd get somewhere. But that to me is the big one. I'd relay back to my younger self.
Nice advice. I like that a lot. And the final one, so if people want to get in contact with you personally, Kim, to learn more about you and what you do, or if they're interested in finding out more about Vested or your work at the UN, how do they get in contact with you?
Yeah, I think the best way, Vested's got a website, www.vestedimpact.co.uk. And my email is kim@vestedimpact.co.uk as well. But through the website they can find me, or obviously on LinkedIn. I'm actually always kind of willing to chat to people, both on a business side, but I think on a personal side, as we've talked so much, Mick, about leadership and mentorship, that I've also learned the value of trying to give some of that back, and what I can. I'm always happy to chat to people that want to learn about changing the world, because we need more of them. The world needs everything we have.
Well done, Kim. I love that. Great way to close out the show. And let's support Kim in her mission to redefine Millionaire as being someone that has an impact on 1 million lives. I just love that. It's one of the best mission statements that I've read, Kim. And I've got no doubt that you're on a mission to be able to do exactly that, and through Vested, making sure that people are thinking about the impact that they do have on the world. So thank you so much, Kim. It's been so great catching up with you. Thank you for being so open and transparent with all of you sharing with our audience today. I know I personally got a lot out of it, and I know our audience will as well. So thank you so much, Kim.
Thanks, Mick, for having me.
You've been listening to The Leadership Project with your host, Mick Spears. Join us each week as we bring you more thought-provoking guests. Don't forget to hit subscribe so that you are informed of all future episodes. If you're enjoying the show, it would be greatly appreciated if you can leave us a review and tell your friends about us. You are also welcome to join the Leadership Project Facebook community group, where we have an active conversation going about all things leadership. Please do take care, look out for each other, and always remember to challenge the status quo.